That Shia LaBeouf video is almost 10 years old, definitely hitting the 10-year mark in 2025. And what's so funny about that is he it became such a big meme, but there was kind of an unironic motivating undertone to it. And there are times where when I was in school, but even now, school, getting up to do, work each day, there is that personal motivator. You're taming that child ego state, and it really can just be the blunt, do it, just do it. And that alone, if you go to the comments of like the oldest original upload of that video, there are people talking about how, again, obviously it became a big meme and people laughed at it, but honestly, I think part of the beauty of that video is the ambiguity of laughing at and laughing with, and then the kind of undertone of how blunt motivation can be. You can, your child ego state, the one that's like, oh, don't study, go play some more Super Smash Brothers Melee, especially now where there's instant online. I remember back in early college, I would actually use Melee as a motivator at times for studying. I would set a timer, and for 10 minutes I would go practice egg ledge canceling on mainly Temple. This was, this was back in 2013, 2014, that kind of year span. And I remember how much that it was interesting. I guess it was being productive as a form of a break. But there was this blunt, like, 10 minutes, go play some Melee, have fun, practice. Again, this was before a lot of online player versus player stuff, and even like training mods. Even though I personally have actually never got, some of the newer training mods. Looks like they can be great resources. I just remember, that was, to me, I was like, I need to practice this technique, and so I went to Hyrule Temple. But that's the interesting part, is that blunt motivation, just do it. And shout outs to my good friend Chad. He I remember at Pokemon Nationals 2016, I would make the jokes about Shia LaBeouf's video. I would quote it. Actually, it was around that time, and it was picking up in momentum, and to this day, like, I'll quote that to him. This was actually 2015, because I remember I was playing Entei Pyroar Raichu at Pokemon Nationals, and that what led into that. So I played that at Nationals, and I was quoting the third Pokemon movie, maybe I am Entei. Just, Dan Green's such a good actor. And Entei's a cool Pokemon. But I remember it was that. Me and Chad had that inside joke. But then it was a bit later. I remember, because, again, the Shia LaBeouf stuff didn't really... the videos came out in around in 2015. So it was a bit later, but then I remember, me and Chad, I'd share just, again, those blunt lines of just do it. And so, what's interesting is all these scenarios I'm talking about were competitive environments, Pokemon TCG, competitive Melee. You could joke that the workforce is competitive, but I'm not going to try to see like other fellow students as, it would be friendly competition. It wouldn't be like, oh, they're my enemies, but there can be a friendly competition for sure. And I think sportsmanship is important. So, with all of that, when you talk about, buckling down and studying, in this case, you're trying to hone the skills of focus. But when it comes to the exam, honestly, you're trying to use both focus and awareness. And I've talked about this in the past, but being able to have some, at least a little bit of competency and awareness can take you a long way, because you can start taking exams and understanding, what does my teacher want out of this? And if it's something as easy as my teacher wants to hear my voice on a short answer, that could get you a good grade right there. If it's my teacher's really iterating the Beethoven era of classical music, and then, you know, I mentioned neural pathways, but that's how studying works. Your brain can start accessing into what you've repeated for yourself over and over, and what you studied and what you remember about Beethoven, which can show up on the exam. It also can lead to predicting things. If I study and I'm understanding that in our notes and in our lectures that the teacher's kind of covering Beethoven a lot, that can be a priority of time. And when it comes to competitive games, I still think it's underrated about the skill of practicing both focus and awareness. And I think sometimes people fall in a pitfall of one, and sometimes the other, the blade starts to get dull. You know, there's a move in Pokemon called Hone Claws, and I love it. The Smogon random battle ladders often have Hone Claws for Pokemon like Zekrom and Durant, and it increases your attack and accuracy. It's basically trading a move like Dragon Dance, where instead of increasing your speed, you're increasing your accuracy. And what I love about that is the way honed claws can increase accuracy in moves that are meant, you know, often moves like Bolt Strike or Stone Edge that do a lot of damage and just are really strong overall, but they don't have 100% accuracy. And I'm all about go big or go home. You know, I'll play Stone Edge anyway. But the fact that there's a move that actually hones consistency for a move while increasing attack is kind of a good example, a one-for-one example about what you can go, how far you can go with honing both focus and awareness. Because oftentimes, you know, in competitive Pokemon, when you're wanting to use a move like Hone Claws, you're using a turn for it. So the opposing person might have their Articuno using Ice Beam on you. Maybe it depends on the scenario. You know, for your Durant, they could just have Heatmore using Flamethrower as you try to use that move. So there's all these different scenarios that you need to prepare for. And during that game state, how can I as a player understand how my opponent works? My opponent is known to switch out when I throw in what could be a threat to them. So in that case, with that context, Articuno's weak to electric. So if I do throw out Zekrom, they might switch out. Though it comes down to a lot of factors of like, who could be faster here between Zekrom and Articuno? What are my opponent's other Pokemon can they switch into? You know, they might switch into Groudon. And so if they switch into Groudon, you know, to me, now I'm thinking, will Hone Claws plus Outrage do enough to knock out their Groudon? And that's awareness of context of the situation. And in fighting games, I think one big pitfall people can fall into is they go into honing just the focus aspect. In fact, sometimes people focus so much, they ironically become bottlenecked in predictive behavior. I mentioned earlier about practicing egg ledge canceling, but you know, one of my big priorities was always playing against people over and over. And there are people that they practice a lot of execution. It's like people that practice an instrument. They're practicing in the practice room a lot. They might play in front of their instructor, but they're not doing a lot of recitals. And in this case, a recital would be like a tournament. You're on stage, you're in front of a lot of people. That's its own skill. That's its own skill of awareness. Not only just awareness, but now you're having to hone focus while there are people around you. Do you play to the crowd, or does the crowd start playing you? And there are oftentimes people that lose their trained focus because they're around other people. They're in new social scenarios. They're in scenarios they're not used to as much. So how can you hone both? Well, I think part of it is understanding yourself. It's understanding who you are. Understanding that there are people in the crowd that they might laugh. And you can't worry about them laughing at you. In fact, by playing with the crowd, they might laugh with you, depending on your presentation. Are you going to lose and throw a fit? Or are you going to lose and shake your opponent's hand? demonstrating to the people watching that you can maintain professional composure, win or lose. And when you put that all together and you do it over and over, you create a routine that does balance between focus and awareness. So when you're in the midst of that game and you're understanding how your opponent's patterns and tendencies are going, I'm playing Yoshi, my opponent is playing Sheik, right? And Sheik has a chain grab on Yoshi in Melee, where if she gets one down throw, it can go from like 0 to 74% after she does an up smash. In this case, in relative example, that matchup is pretty hard for Yoshi as a character. It's pretty hard. I have to be really careful overall, because if I get grabbed, that could be most of my life. You know, in Melee you have 4 lives, and you get a little bit of wiggle room usually after the chain grab. Usually doesn't, you know, truly 0 to death you, as they say, you know, which would be losing your stock. But in this case, I have that. I'm aware of that. My focus is right there. Okay, I should probably avoid getting grabbed. But my awareness now starts to factor, what is my opponent like? You know, and that's the thing about when we talk about matchups, when we talk about characters versus characters. I think people sometimes hyper-focus on the character matchup, but the awareness of who's pressing those buttons tends to get pushed under the rug in certain scenarios, and that can undermine the player's execution because they come in with expectations. Oh, this is a Sheik, they're always gonna grab me. But I'm fighting a Sheik now that is staying vertically above me. In fact, they're pressuring me with her projectile needles, and when I jump up far enough, they throw out a forward air, which is pretty fast. So I'm now, a lot of my space is being controlled by that Sheik. But by that awareness of that space being controlled, and because I, again, classic T-Hawk quote, value humility as a virtue, I'm willing to adjust myself right now. I'm willing to change. Now it comes down to, how does the opponent respond? They're not getting what they want. They've practiced this. They've honed this. Their focus is drilled into, what can I do against Yoshi that's really strong? But because I've recognized this and I'm not giving them that setup, are they willing to change to plan B, Z, Q, T? Or is it because plan A is not met? They might start throwing a fit. You know, oftentimes on streams I make a joke about people leaving the oven on. And I want to give the benefit of the doubt there. But I've noticed that at times when I don't give opponents what they want, what they've focused on, if they don't have the awareness of my tendencies, they might refuse to adapt, and it looks like a rage quit. But we, you know, again, benefit of the doubt, you hope that, oh my gosh, my cinnamon rolls! Yeah. But even in that case, usually if they do that, they kind of stand still. There's like an online etiquette where if they stand still for a while, you know, you stand still too, hoping everything's okay. Every now and then there's the rare scenario where they might be doing a long form of like, I'm going to try to get the life lead at the last 5 seconds, which is pretty funny. Not really a thing I would do. But you know, that is one thing. But in general, yeah, when someone stands still, they try to go. That usually means they have an emergency. And so in the case of analyzing what your opponent does when you don't give them what you want, I think is an important skill, and it goes back to awareness. So now my awareness is there, but my focus is maintained, my path is maintained. I have plan A, how do I keep executing plan A? Plan A is being negated, Sheik keeps hitting me every time I jump. Okay, time for a new plan. I'm gonna wait a little bit. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna see what Sheik initiates. Is Sheik gonna take more space? Is the player playing Sheik scared of losing space themselves? So in their competitive projection, they see space as a huge value. Thus, when they take space, what if they're trying to get me to budge? They're saying, haha, I took your space, now you have to do something. And then what if I don't? What if I do stand still for a bit as they take more space? Sometimes I've had people leave when I stand still just for a little bit. And what I'm doing is I'm shifting momentum. I'm keeping my focus, but my awareness is that, oh, they're calling me out a few times. Okay, let's try this. And you have to be daring. I think awareness is a part of daring. Because if you're daring, you have something new to focus on, a new plan of execution. And with that, you can consistently carry yourself throughout life. and you're able to keep honing what you want to do, keep honing for your own success. And hopefully, with that awareness, you're helping inspire other people around you to be true to themselves and keep working on them being a better person. I love Mondays.